Helldiver, number 12803, was a bit ambivalent about his new mission on Crimsica. From Istanu to Coepessa 4, he had been fighting on snowy planets for months. Now, he was on this temperate ball that felt nearly like paradise. It seemed easy enough to adapt his mech piloting skills to the rocky terrain and blast a few bugs. Or it would have been if Pelican 1 hadn't dropped his Emancipator in the ocean. Reginald here. With the release of both mechs, I think it's about time that I deliver a tutorial on how to use them that will hopefully stand regardless of future buffs, nerfs, bugs, or bug fixes. As always, I am including a roadmap on screen below for this video and a nifty tracker on the bottom right corner of the screen, as well as careful timestamping. First, defenses. To begin, I'd like to direct your attention to Helldivers.io, which contains all of the stats for the mechs and their hit zones, as well as their weaponry. I did a ton of testing on this front originally, but there's no need anymore because it's all there already. The big takeaways I want to leave you with are basically that the legs, and, of all things, the front armor on the mechs, and it is basically the same for both of them, are the weak spots. There are also a few little small places on both of them that are a little different, as well as joints and things like that. These areas have only 2 armor, which means even something like the Liberator with light armor pen is capable of penetrating right through them and will not deflect. For the record, those spaces are here, here, and here. Whereas the sides and some of the arm sections are going to be armor 3 and able to deflect light armor penetrating weaponry, but not medium. This means that the mech is susceptible to most small arms fire, though still reasonably resilient to low caliber fire despite this fact. These are the places that you are going to want to protect while fighting above all else. But the whole mech is rather lightly armored and can generally be destroyed with relative ease by enemies and friendlies with high penetration weaponry. So far, there have been several changes to the mech and its survivability, so we may see more, but it's a vehicle that is weak to medium and heavy weapons, and that will likely remain true. There are a few other key details you can't really get from the stats menu, so let me provide those to you now. The mech does have body hit zones, including the right or left leg, the rotary cannon arm, the rocket pod, and the torso. Or in the case of the Emancipator, both autocannon arms. It is fully possible to have both arms ripped off and still be functional and not even smoking. Damage to the legs causes limping, which reduces movement speed, whereas damage to any of the arms, significant enough to rip them off, will prevent you from using them. I mean, if they're gone, they're gone. Bot mines can kill you in 2 hits. That may get worse or better in time, but know that they can kill you pretty quick, whereas you can more or less step on and over an infinite number of bug mines without incurring significant or meaningful damage. Player anti-personnel mines and incendiary mines now take quite a few hits compared to before, where it was merely 2. Also, these dangerous little spike trees can absolutely blow you up. In that vein, as far as I can tell, bile spitters don't seem to do any damage to you when you step on them, though it kind of looks like it might. And any kind of fire on the ground, toxic clouds, gas, or EMS, as far as I can tell, has no effect on the mech. Second, offenses. As with the defenses, some of this data is on Helldivers.io, and furthermore, the weapons in Helldivers are subject to quite a bit of change. So let's talk about these weapons thematically instead of precisely. On the Patriot Exosuit, you have a rocket pod designed for armor work and a rotary cannon designed for medium and light enemy work. Each have a limited ammo supply. The Emancipator Exosuit has twin dual autocannon assemblies, which are designed primarily for medium targets and heavy target weak points. Both mechs have 2 legs, which allow the player to ram enemies, as well as stomp attack for a quick cleanup of small numbers of lighter targets. The mech also has a pair of headlights, which can be toggled with the default key X on PC. Let's quick do some tips for each one. For the rotary cannon, my best tip against bots is to shoot off Devastator rocket pods first, and gun for strider legs or crotches. Otherwise, the targets are all pretty much the same as anything you'd want an MG for, and in my view, it serves quite well here. In the case of bugs, the rotary cannon gets a lot of value and can really rack up some significant killing sprees. Additionally, one of the best combos for the missile pod is to hit a charger's leg to break its armor and then finish it off with a rotary cannon. Speaking of the missile pod, it's pretty handy for all of the usual heavy suspects, but also, with good aim, you can blow bot transports out of the sky. The missile pod has had a lot of adjustments, and we'll probably see more in the future, so the exact shot counts for specific targets aren't relevant in this tutorial. As for the autocannons on the Emancipator, it really is just a matter of using it the same way you would your man-portable autocannon. You're hunting for mail slots and weak spots, but it does have the ability, admittedly weakly, to target heavier enemies like Bile Titans and dropships, and yes, both mechs can destroy shipping containers with their anti-armor weaponry, but also by stomping on them. A few more key details as we go here. Neither the rocket pod nor the autocannon do significant damage to you off of any individual shot when close. It is fairly challenging actually now to deal self-damage at this time, but you certainly can blow yourself up or blow your arms off if you really go for it. Now I did mention that you could stomp on enemies as well as stepping on enemies, and they're a little different. To stomp on enemies, you're going to be doing a stomp attack directly in front of you. It's got a small AoE and you use your melee key to achieve it. It's kind of hard to aim, but more or less walk towards your target and expect it to go a little to the left. As for stepping on your enemies, well, for warriors and hunters, you do this simply by ramming them mindlessly until they die. It's pretty slow, but if you have nothing but your legs left, it is an option. Bots are actually treated the same way as warriors in that you can kill them by just sort of ramming them. It will stop you from moving, and this is a bit annoying, but because their health bars are much lower, they die a lot faster, and it is pretty easy to get through a group of them through this method. Speaking of ramming, the charger will not actually apparently harm you, at least not much, even from the front. Instead, it will stop dead, becoming stunned, and take damage itself. In my testing, it is possible to kill a charger this way. If you simply backpedal every time it gets stunned, it will never attack you directly and will instead always charge you, thus affording you the ability to kill it without firing any shots. That could be a handy way to use a weaponless mech. Third, mobility and utility. We're just about done outlining some of the capabilities and limitations of the mech that are not self-evident in the HUD or stats or web tools. The mech can traverse some pretty impressive terrain, but cannot jump. Generally speaking, the mech is not slowed by any kind of weather effects, including seismic tremors, though blizzards will slow it down some. Finally, as far as I could test, there is no evidence that the mech takes any fall damage or any real damage from stomping around in water at waist height. So for the most part, the mech makes you largely immune to terrain effects, and that's pretty useful in and of itself. It is also not really that big and can fit inside of just about every bot base floor plan, navigating tight corridors to gain advantage in assaults. I assume this will be true in the illuminated bases as well. While the exosuit can strafe left and right, this is much slower than its forward speed. However, it can actually walk diagonally at what appears to be full speed or possibly faster. As such, this is extremely useful when fighting enemies at a range in a zigzag pattern to avoid shots on otherwise open ground. You can destroy small terrain, including bushes and trees, just by walking into them, as well as shooting some of the terrain pieces or maybe stomping on a few others. This can actually be very useful in preparing a defense or extraction, which I have talked about in great detail in this video. It's towards the end. Mechs can be ridden on by other players, but it's not really worth the setup time in most cases, which is why I think most people stopped doing it shortly after the mech released. There is one little issue that probably needs to be addressed. You cannot carry the data objectives inside the mech, which seems like a mistake. I would assume this gets addressed in the future. Shriekers that make swooping attacks on your mech will just... One last detail before we get into tactics. Probably should put this in defense, come to think of it, but whatever. The only support backpack at this time that works on the mech and has any effect at all on the mech is actually the personal shield bubble, which looks like this and covers quite a bit of the mech's surface area. So it is a very strong buff. If you're going to be running the mech, I recommend you bring this because it increases your survivability quite a lot. Fourth, tactics. Originally, when trying to write this section, I spent a lot of time digging around field manuals and watching YouTube videos about tank tactics and a lot of other stuff. And honestly, I didn't really find much to bring to the table. So instead, I'm going to make some assertions in this section based on my experience. When fighting bugs, it's perfectly fine to just stomp around like a big, indestructible walking tank. But when fighting bots, and presumably in the future this will hold true for the Illuminids as well, you really need to think of yourself differently. Not as a tank, but rather as Big Infantry. As a companion to this point, you're going to want to fight the same way you do on foot. Strafe to dodge shots, maneuver from cover to cover, avoid heavy enemy weaponry, pick your target priorities to ensure your own safety, bait out enemy shots that will hit terrain instead of you before peeking corners. Fight in the defilades of the hills and around rocks. Use terrain to your advantage to maximize your uptime. That last point was really the big aha moment for me. I originally got the idea for this video while I was playing games trying to figure out how to use the mech shortly after it released, which was some time back now. At the time, the mech was easily killed by just a couple of Devastator rockets, like 2. That meant that a single volley, having like 6 or so, would usually just kill you outright from a single rocket Devastator. All these tricks I've learned have since only made it easier to survive now that the mech has been buffed in its defensive capacity and enemy rockets have been nerfed in damage. On screen, you should be watching an extract where I use the defilade of a hill to my advantage to maximize the uptime on my mech despite a lot of incoming fire going around. All I really did was move around the backside of the hill, firing at different angles, avoiding staying in one place too long, much the same way that an infantry Helldiver might fight between a couple of rocks, poking out from one corner or the other. As much as the mech is still a big attention hog, the enemy can still lose you behind terrain. You can pop out and surprise them, or otherwise hit them from an angle they don't expect, resulting in them needing to spend some time turning to face you. They can also lose their tracking aggro on you and focus on someone else. But since there are a lot of enemies still on the field that can kill you in just one hit, like turrets, it's important to keep in mind your positioning behind those defilades so that you don't end up exposing yourself to one of those shots at the wrong time. This is why I am describing you as Big Infantry. In many ways, you want to fight the same way you fight on foot when fighting big scary things like Hulks, or when fighting big scary things like tanks. You're not trying to take them head on, you're trying to poke out from around cover, and you need to be thinking of doing the same thing with your mech. That said, one of the other things you want to do is not be too cagey with your ammunition. Yes, it's nice to conserve it and keep your mech uptime as long as possible, but if you do find yourself to be coming close to taking too much damage, smoking, getting close to death, just mag dump and bail. Don't worry about trying to get the highest possible value of all your rockets or all your ammunition. Just kill as much stuff as you can as quickly as you can so that you can clear that area so that when you hop out on foot, you have that much easier of a time. Another thing to note is that you can shoot a lot farther than you think, and you should. Keeping your enemy at a distance allows you to leverage cover much more easily to avoid and block shots, as well as mobility to dodge incoming shots. Furthermore, since you can fire from so far away, many enemies can't actually return fire at longer distances, giving you a huge advantage. For many objectives, if you can find good terrain for it, it's possible to fire across the map with some of these weapons and just destroy objectives early in the game with limited exposure to your own life. As mentioned a couple of times, do walk on angles to foil enemy shot tracking and change directions often. Basically, zigzag. There are generally speaking two main times to call in your mech. One is early in the game when you want to do an assault on something. The other good situation is defense. Now this can be just a defense against like a large enemy bot drop or an objective, but extraction is a popular choice for using your final mech. In either case, you're going to want to call in your mech behind some terrain so that it doesn't just end up being in the open the second you get into it. Trying to hot drop the thing in, because if you hop in a bad situation, you'll die pretty quick. For assaults, I'm going to recommend the following basic approach. Try to skirt around the edges of the base, looking for any big nasty threats that you didn't see, like turrets or tanks that can one-shot you, and then make sure to pop those before you try to enter into the base. And once you've secured your position a little bit and skirted the edges and knocked out a few lighter enemies, just go ahead and waltz right in. There's not really much that can usually stop you unless you run into like 5 Hulks, in which case you might want to play a little bit of peekaboo with them. Because the mech is largely immune to small arms fire, you can oftentimes just strut right into a key objective, like I'm doing here, and just hop out, plant your hell bomb, hop back in, and walk away. You don't even necessarily need to expend ammunition killing all the little bots around, since the hell bomb will take care of it. As ever, don't pick fights you can't win, so this is where that skirting around the edges thing really comes in handy, and this can go for big bot drops too, since we're going to be talking about defense here. When holding defense, you're going to want to try and find your best big piece of cover to hide behind, especially one that has other pieces of cover to maneuver to. I've talked about this at length in other videos, so I'm not going to dig too hard into it here, but suffice it to say, you kind of want to make a U shape around where the enemy formation is, stomping around various pieces of cover, firing from the angles, and then hiding. I can't stress enough that in all circumstances when using the mech, you really need to always be moving, especially if there's incoming fire. Just always be walking around so that you can easily change course and move. You don't want to be stuck somewhere standing around when a rocket barrage comes your way. 5. Outro. It feels like there's a lot more I could talk about, but I think I'm going to call this tutorial here. I've covered as much as I think I can cover in a reasonable time. I will say I had a rather hard time making this video, though I can't put my finger on why. In any case, I still hope I've managed to deliver a high quality and concise package of dense information to you, the viewer. If I didn't, or if there was something I could improve for future videos, I'd love to hear from you in a comment below. I do make an effort to read them all, even if I can't respond to them all. If I think up more tactics or realize I missed something cool, I will definitely post a short about it, so keep an eye out for that. As my last act in this video, I'd like to just take a moment to speak to my subscribers. I genuinely really appreciate you subscribing to my channel, and I appreciate seeing regulars come by and leave comments. However, I've run into a surprising problem with the recent growth of my channel and surprising view numbers I've gotten on some videos. As a consequence, it's been pretty hard to get to everyone's comments like I normally would. I'm like 2 months behind in some cases on reading and responding to everything still. So here's the rule I've decided to implement. I'll do my best to respond to every comment that seems like it would benefit from it. Otherwise, I will leave your comment a heart if I've read it, and a like if I like it. That way, at least there's some way for me to let you know that I read your comment and didn't just ignore you. Otherwise, I haven't gotten to it yet, and I'll do my best to get there. With that, thanks so much for visiting. I really do hope you have a lovely day, and bye-bye. O Mech of the Seas, what is your wisdom?